Welcome back. WNST having some fun sports conversations. A little heavy metal last week with Rob Halford and Michael Schenker, as we'll be kicking that up a notch or two as well. We're in Indianapolis all week long for the NFL Combine, and so will Jon Gruden, and he will not be on the ESPN bus and grinding in the back of the bus with quarterbacks. Instead, it's all Oakland Raiders all the time. This guy caught up with Jon Gruden out in Oakland, and he's one of my favorite guests, one of my favorite writers. If you've been on his Twitter, there's even a Fells Point Diner guy motif to his Twitter. I don't think he just did that for us. He is S.L. Price. We call him Scott. You can find him out at Sports Illustrated, where he is a senior writer and one of my faves as well, and chasing Jon Gruden on Super Bowl Sunday. Scott, how goes it, man? Happy winter to you. Happy post-Olympics.
Yeah. Yep, it's absolutely great to be here. Thanks for having me. It's where we are post Super Bowl, we're sort of in that dead zone. Looking forward to spring training, trying to get that together, and it's one of the great times of year because everybody can take a breath.
You know, I always kid Billick about, Billick's my partner here, and I always say to him, I'm mystified by Gruden. Like, I don't know Gruden. I've come in contact with Gruden more than a handful of times, including that fateful day in Oakland when Billick beat Gruden and won the Super Bowl and all that.
Yep.
And the one time I talked to him, it was about a Playboy interviewer where he defined himself as a ham and egger. And I had a chat with him about being a ham and egger. And, this is when he was still the Bucs coach. Baltimore. Get in here, Baltimore. I want to talk to you. And I always had sort of a man crush on him. Then he got overexposed. It was kind of like Hootie and the Blowfish, or maybe even Led Zeppelin for some people. But Gruden, man, I want to hear the Playboy sort of preamble to you sitting with Jon Gruden at Super Bowl. Feels like you knew him a little bit, or had some affinity or some real relationship with him to be able to write this kind of a piece, Scott.
Well, it was really interesting because I had done a piece 16 years ago on Jon Gruden right after he left Oakland and went to Tampa. And, I sort of did the standard, biography piece on him. And this time around, and that sort of freed me up to do a different kind of piece. I wanted to do one where you basically were just in the office with Jon Gruden, hanging with Jon Gruden, getting a sense of what he's like, and why he's back and what he's thinking. And to tell you the truth, the piece I did 16 years ago, I made a connection with him, and I talked to his family and talked to his brother, and there was lots of crazy stuff about the brawls he used to have with Jay Gruden, and the fact that his older brother was smarter than he was, and Jay was a better athlete, and he was stuck in between, and he just felt like inferior to both of them in different ways, and
by the way, I chased John Harbaugh around. I'm kind of familiar with that.
Right. Brothers, man. Brothers is a universal, So, but the thing is that, he didn't know me. He didn't remember me, and nor should he. If there were 1,000 pieces written about him at the time, he did remember the cover. That was him and Warren Sapp. But the most interesting thing is, and I got to tell you, I've been doing this 35 years. I got a hold of a 6-year-old cell phone number for Jon Gruden, and I dialed it on the Saturday before his press conference. So the whole NFL world was ablaze with, is he getting hired? When's he getting hired? What's it about? What is he going to do? What's he going to say? And I dialed the phone number, and I expected, it'll go straight to some voicemail, and there'll be no voice on it, and it'll go up in the ether, and I'll never hear from him again. But
or it was 5 phone numbers ago for him, right?
Yeah,
he's had 3 jobs, right?
Yeah, and boom, he picks it up. He's like, "Hello," and off we went. And I had to dance pretty quick and say, "Look, John, you don't remember me, but I'd like to come out and see you once this is all said and done." And the weirdest thing about it is I called him like 2-3 more times to set things up. One time I called, he's like, "Oh, hey, I'm in a coach's meeting." I'm like, "John, is this a good time?" "Oh, I'm in a coach's meeting." Or he's about to sit down for dinner, and I'm thinking to myself, why are you picking up the phone? Like I don't, my daughter barely picks up the phone when I call. It's like nobody picks it up when a strange number, with an area code you don't recognize comes up, and yet he did. And so I went out there. I sat with him on Super Bowl Sunday in his office where he was just, as you say, grinding away, and the game was on, but we ended up talking. We sort of wandered through Al Davis's office, which is still preserved exactly as it was when he died in 2011. Just sort of a haunting thing. And then we went to a bar the next day, and Ricky's, which is a famous Oakland Raiders bar, and also just driving around. He's a terrible driver, and it was hilarious. And just really, I just wanted to get a sense of the energy and what it felt like. And one of the funniest things that didn't get into the piece is that you haven't lived till you've heard Jon Gruden imitating his own mother. And what I mean by that is, he said, yeah, my mom was real excited when she heard I wanted to go back to Oakland. And I said, well, what are you talking about? He goes, well, I called her up. I said, Mom, Mark Davis wants me to come back, and I think I'm going to do it. And he says, he imitates his mother in the Gruden, speak. He goes, and my mom said to me, "You go for it, Johnny G." And that's you haven't lived till you see Jon Gruden's face all scrunched up imitating his own mother in that Gruden voice. But, look, he's dedicated to football. He loves it. And you're right, he did get overexposed, but frankly, he got overexposed because we're fascinated by him, because he is somebody who, it's interesting, because Gruden is not a guy, and he'll be the first to tell you, who doesn't have a lot of depth. He's not, he's not Pat Riley, pondering the greater mysteries of the universe or leadership. He just wants the ball. And yet, even though he's not really deep, and he'll say, I'm not that interesting, and he's right in the sense of, he doesn't have a wide-ranging flow of topics to talk about, but he is mesmerizing. And so it's a weird combination of he's actually sort of, I guess the phrase is uninteresting or uninterested in the world, yet he is mesmerizing to talk to. And the fact is that he got overexposed because, he was on TV, and a lot of people like that. A lot of people don't like that, and they like to argue about it. But overall, he's still the same guy. And he's back really where he belongs, which is with a team.
Well, and look, I was very close with Jack Del Rio, and I'm very familiar with Mr. Davis's office and Jack's office there. And I addressed the team a year and a half ago, and we swabbed a bunch of Raiders. And it felt like at that time Jack's got this job. Then, last year I'm at the owners' meetings. They moved the franchise. Jack gets $20 million in the deal, right? He's got the franchise quarterback coming back. It felt like Jack was going to make it to Vegas, and a lot of these guys weren't. I mean, who knows whether the wide receiver is going to make it to Vegas or Khalil Mack's going to make it to Vegas, but it felt like Jack had the front door to that, and boom, it's gone, right? And here comes Gruden into this thing. And I got to tell you, for Mark Davis to be the dumbest guy in the room or perceived as such every year at these owners' meetings, Scott, and I go to these owners' meetings, boy, what an incredible story of him and Adelson in Vegas and Nevada and the money and the stadium and how that's going to come out in the wash. And then on the other side of this, to get Gruden to come back to bridge this gap, for them to become really, call the Cowboys America's team or the Yankees or, the Dodgers or these other sort of American iconic teams, but the Raiders are trying to put their brand into Vegas in a way that would allow everyone to descend upon Vegas every week, and then have Gruden on the front end of this to help sell PSLs and whatever else they need to sell in Las Vegas to make it work. It really is kind of brilliant. And then, Scott, I got to tell you, the Gruden thing where, and Billick spoke to me about this all the time, like part of the neat part in those early years for him when he thought he was going to go back and coach again was he got to sit in all these meetings with all these coaches and all these quarterbacks and stay involved. Boy, Gruden did it at another level where he scouted these guys during combines and during training camps and pro days, and then got to spend real time with them in the summer. There's video of him with all of these quarterbacks in the league. Boy, this is a pretty stealth thing he's put together here, and I know he loves that underestimated ham and egg or dumbest guy in the room. Certainly Mark Davis loves that, but they've put themselves together something here. I'll tell you what, if you gave me $1 and said, will they win a Super Bowl in the next 6 years, 8 years together? Maybe. I'd be more inclined to say he's probably a genius at this point than not, and probably has forgotten more than maybe a Dick Vermeil did when he came back and tried to do this thing a decade later.
Well, the thing is that, I will tell you that, look, when a lot of these coaches, when they get not put out or go out to pasture and become a commentator, they're not working as hard as they did when they were coaching, and it's a little bit easy, and they can slide a little bit on their name, and of course they're great knowledge. There's a lot for them to spew off about because they've got 30 years of coaching in the trenches. Gruden didn't do that. Gruden actually, in some ways, you can argue, look, he was an offensive, genius, whatever. He was an offensive-minded quarterback guru when he went into the booth. That's what that's sort of who he was. And I would argue that he became more well-rounded, or certainly I wouldn't be surprised he became more well-rounded. He certainly thinks he did by going and studying defenses and offenses and essentially four teams all week, one for each, one day for the offensive unit, one day for the defensive unit, and flop for the other team. He became much more well-rounded in terms of holistically looking at the whole of a football team. Now, he's still offensive-minded, he's still QB crazy, and he's going to focus on Derek Carr like, you wouldn't believe. Look, one other thing, Mark Davis told me, and you're right about Jack Del Rio. Mark Davis told me, look, if I wasn't getting Gruden, Jack Del Rio's still the coach here. Like, it was, he obviously, because of the Rooney Rule, talked to T. Martin, and another Raiders assistant.
I'm laughing. I'm thinking, what Rooney Rule is that you speak of, Scott?
Right. Right. And so, but essentially, he said to me, if it wasn't going to be Gruden, I would have fired my coordinators and gotten new coordinators in here. And Jack would still be here. And I think you're right about Vegas. Look, everybody, especially football fans and especially Raiders fans, fancy themselves a Buccaneer. They're a pirate. That's why they love that label on the side of the helmet. And the fact is that anybody who goes to Vegas fancies themselves a little bit of a pirate. I'm a gambler. I'm a maniac. I'm a partier. Everything that happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. If that doesn't dovetail with the Raider image, I don't know what does. So it is a brilliant move for this team to move there. And look, nobody likes Oakland more than I do. And I'm talking about the town, the city. I think it's gotten a bum rap. I think it's a great city. And I think it's always, in many ways, a far more interesting place than San Francisco. And I lived out there, so I hate the heartbreak that those people are going to feel when that team leaves. But I'll tell you, going to Vegas is I think a brilliant move. And like you said about Mark Davis, easy to underestimate the guy, but he got the NFL to vote him to go. As he said, he gave an offer they couldn't refuse, and then he sat on Jon Gruden for 6 years. He said at least 15 visits. I've seen as many as 25, going through Dallas, making the connection, staying in the same hotel, and then trying to woo Jon Gruden, and he finally got his man.
Scott Price is SL Price. He is by SL Price out on Twitter. You will find him when you find the Fells Point Diner and the legendary Diner guys on the front of his Twitter. Playing Through the Whistle is his book, Steel Football and an American Town. And I guess, look, I'm headed out to Indianapolis. Thank God it's not going to be 12 below like it has been sometimes out there. I might not even need my long johns this week. The Combine has become, and the league has become, this annual thing. It feels like about 5 minutes ago that I was at the Super Bowl freezing at the Mall of America. I got through my chest cold that I lingered 10 days, and boom, here I am in February. Here we are at the Combine. The Eagles won, but that feels like a long time ago. And they rev up this whole new thing and the draft and all of this. This is a tough time for the NFL in some ways, and I think going through image and obviously where they are with Kaepernick and where we are in Baltimore, where half of the PSL owners don't want to renew their PSLs and their season tickets. They're angry about the knee and about the Wembley knee here specifically. And then you write this book about Pittsburgh. It's an incredible thing with towns like Aliquippa and football in our lifetime, and I turned 50 this year, Scott, that how ingrained football and the culture and the city and America and holidays and all of that stuff sort of bleeds together. But, you wrote a book about how it's all sort of intertwined in not such a good way in the end. But also, I think for the NFL, we're trying to see where the tippy top is. And I guess leaving Oakland for Vegas, leaving St. Louis for L.A., leaving San Diego for God knows where, right, at this point. But, right. They're chasing the dollar. But, the sport and the kids and the injured people and the CTE, the whole dark side of this thing sort of gets left behind. And I know you shined a very bright light on that with your book last year, and I think further now we get away from that election, and a year and a half later, you start to see things happen here in America and football all around it, right?
Yeah, and look, it's very interesting because, look, Aliquippa, it's funny. This is a steel town 20 to 25 miles outside Pittsburgh, and it produced Ditka and Tony Dorsett and Darrelle Revis and Ty Law, Henry Mancini, Pete Maravich, all these incredible people, sports and otherwise. Football was a through line, and I wrote this story about the 100-year history of this town. It is still, they're still winning championships. They're still competing, and they're a Class A team winning championships on a Class 3A level, even though they're playing up 2 levels. I do this Gruden piece, and part of it is Gruden saying, he says, I think football is losing its soul. We've completely lost sight of what football's about. It's a great game. The toughness, the things that you have to go through. We're pampering players too much, X, Y, and Z. This is his feeling. And, of course, as a coach, he wants to have his hands on them 8 hours a day, 12 months a year. So, he's definitely got that old school streak in him. Meanwhile, of course, there's this incredible pull with CTE and the feelings about the injuries and the battering and really for, brain aside, just the battering these guys take week in and week out. It is a brutal, brutal game. There's no question about it. The thing I noticed in Aliquippa was this is a town where an overrun with drugs, gangs, it's had its problems since the steel mill went down, and football is seen as a real prime way out because others have gone out and set the example and shown that it can be done. And so kids play football thinking, I'm going to get in the league. We all know the odds against that. It's very, very difficult. It's not to say almost impossible. Aliquippa's an anomaly. But they've got 4 youth teams in that town, starting at the age of 5, and all of them, and I was there for 6-7 years working on this book, and there was never a whisper about CTE or parents saying, oh, you shouldn't play football or any of that. It was as if it was in a bubble. And that's because it was seen as a way out. Kind of like boxing was seen like as a way out in the 30s, 40s, 50s. You became a boxer so your son could become a doctor. You didn't want to pass it on, but you took a battering and beating because you wanted to make your life better and life better for your family. I think that football is headed that way because I certainly live in an area in Washington, D.C., and youth football is declining because middle-class parents who have any kind of option are sending their kid elsewhere. Look, we're in a culture now where kids are, wrapped up in cotton batting just to put them in a car and drive down the street to CVS, and that's the law of the land. I mean, and so everybody's very nervous about safety of children, rightfully so. But as a result, do you think any right-thinking mother especially is going to say, yeah, if I have to choose between soccer or, whatever, or football, lacrosse or football, basketball or football, and my son's, is gonna have a problem with motor function or possibly have, concussion damage to their brain, no mother who has a choice is going to do that. So I think we are headed in the long run to football being closer and closer to boxing in terms of lower socioeconomic classes are going to continue to play it because they know and think that it provides a way out. But middle class parents are going to divert their kids elsewhere.
He is Scott Price. You can find him out on Twitter at @BuySLPrice. He's one of my favorites at Sports Illustrated, as well as at the MMQB. Did a phenomenal piece on Jon Gruden. You should go check out as we head off to the NFL Combine. Luke and I will be in Indianapolis all week long. All of it brought to you by our friends at Howard Bank, a relentless commitment to be the best at everything they do. Branches now throughout Baltimore and Maryland, as well as our friends at Royal Farms. Real fresh, real fast, tasty coffee. The best fried chicken anywhere. Gas up. Make sure you're using that Royal Farms app on your phone to save yourself some dough. Get yourself some free fried chicken. Also by our friends at Pizza John's, my mom's favorite pizza, my wife's favorite pizza. I've got the hat tonight here with Scott Price, and you can find his work out at Sports Illustrated as well as at @BuySLPrice. All right, last thing for you, Scott, because I know you're an Olympics guy. We've seen it come. We've seen it go. We've seen the Russians banned. We've seen him in. We've seen him out. We've seen him drug tested and cheating for curling, of all things. Curling caught on. I caught on to curling 20 years ago because I figured you can drink beer. It's a little bit like shuffleboard on ice. You know what I mean? You could probably have a hot dog, some pizza, some French fries, things that I grew up with in the bowling lanes. But it's over with now. And Seoul, and I every time an Olympics comes by, whether it's London or whether it's Brazil or whether it's not, wherever it is, it just feels sleazier and greasier and grimier and more political. And given the state of our political sphere right now on Pennsylvania Avenue, I just don't feel the same way about it. And it sucks for me. It sucks for my emotions. I don't feel the same way about baseball as I did when I collected cards in the 70s either. I cry with Steve Rushin about that all the time, Scott. But, the Olympics are one of those things that when I watch it, I itch a little bit for all of it, for the coverage, for NBC. We get a bunch of dead kids in Florida. Now back to the ski slopes. I mean, literally, that happened 10, 12 days ago,
Yeah, it's bizarre. I mean, and look, the Olympics has struggled to find its place ever since the end of the Cold War, because essentially it was a proxy for war between Russia and the United States, Soviet Union, United States, and essentially it stood in basketball. There's a famous 72 gold medal game, and the fact that the American team still doesn't accept its silver medal to this day in that sport, and of course, there's the great a miracle on ice. So when you had that backdrop, that instead of war, we were going to fight out these battles on the playing fields of all things, it really gave the Olympics an incredible resonance that it's been lacking ever since. And the weird thing is that it is kind of like the United States of America. The Olympics is based on an ideal. And every time unlike the World Cup, which is basically based on, hey, let's kick each other's butt in the name of our countries and make a lot of money. The Olympics is all about the Olympic ideal and cooperation. Doesn't matter if you win or lose, so on and so forth. It's not about the money, but of course, it does matter very much if you win or lose, and it's very much about the money. And so just like the United States, which is based on an ideal, whenever it falls short of its ideal, because an ideal is something that human beings can never reach, people accuse it of hypocrisy. People rightfully accuse it of falling short of what the standards that it's asking for other people, so on and so forth. So it's this incredible push and pull, and especially when it no longer serves as sort of a superpower in a superpower dynamic, it sort of loses its oomph. And frankly, this year aside, okay, but with the Sochi Games and in Rio, and especially with China now, where the Olympic Games, the Winter Games, weirdly enough, will be held again in Beijing after being held in Beijing for the Summer Games in '08, because only dictatorships can afford to tell their populaces that they're going to put this on, like it or not. The Olympics is sort of now linked up with, more often than is comfortable, certainly for me, with dictatorships, with oppressive regimes like in Russia and China. And frankly, I think it's a bad look for the Olympics, and the human rights abuses in China that were there in 2008 in some ways are worse now, and certainly are all trending that way.
Well, Scott, I love my South American people, but the people of Rio are still drinking distilled excrement at this point, right? I mean, literally.
Exactly.
Right?
No, exactly. Yeah. They didn't live up to the promises. So it's a very strange thing for the Olympics. In some ways, I feel this pull of the World Cup, and I love the World Cup because it doesn't purport to be about anything but winning and about stark nationalism, and FIFA is not ever holding itself up as some sort of ethical paragon. It is corrupt. We all know it, and we want to see our team beat that country's team. And
our team's not beating anybody this year, Scott.
No, that's correct. That's correct. I meant R for any country. Every country feels that way.
God, we didn't qualify, dude. Dude, we didn't qualify. I mean, how is that possible?
Well, it's possible because, yeah. Anyway.
There were bags of money, I'm sure of it. I mean, how else can you explain Qatar?
Yeah. No, exactly. I mean, it's absurd, but it's out there, and nobody says, well, they're not living up to their ideals. No one ever says that about the World Cup. No one ever says that about FIFA. There are no ideals. It's just about the money, and it's about, having that competition so people can love their team and love football, and that's it. And I mean football, F-U-T-B-O-L.
Scott, I want to plug your FOOTBALL book on Al Aquippa. There was an update to the coach, right? To extend that story along, the coach is a very central figure in all things. Update me on that, because that's sort of the thing that happens after the book's done, right?
Yeah, right, exactly. I mean, look, this past week, Mike Zmianek, who's one of the four faces on Al Aquippa's Mount Rushmore of coaches, was essentially let go, after 20 years as the head coach and doing an incredible job of leading this team and keeping it as a haven for these players in many ways. in the last 20 years. Now he's in his 70s. He was ready to go, but he really wanted to. He came back to them and said, "I'd like one more year." And school boards are school boards. In the end, they said, "Nope, you're gone," and that's that. So it's really the end of an era. This is a guy who coached Darrell Revis and Sean Gilbert, and so the last. And he grew up in Aliquippa, and he grew up at a time when Aliquippa was in its glory days. So it's really the closing of a chapter for Aliquippa.
Hey, we will promote the book. It's been beloved by everyone and has some real slice of Americana and sort of speaks to the Dundalk in me, playing through the whistle, steel, football, and an American town. Scott, you'll know my dad was a 30-year steel worker, Bethlehem Steel in Dundalk, and our community is fallen upon some challenges as well where I'm from. So your book does speak to me in many terms. By the way, buy SL Price is the best way to follow Scott out on Twitter. And I'm going to give a plug here for an old story of yours on Richard Ben Kramer to tell everybody to go read that as well. And I know you're working on something else beyond Jon Gruden, as always, Scott. It is a pleasure anytime we get together. I appreciate your time. And what are you working on? You got something, anything in the works you can talk about at all, or is it all top secret, man?
I'm thinking about a book about lacrosse.
Wow. All right. Well, I'm in Baltimore, so that probably puts you around here at some point in the cradle of lacrosse, right?
Yep. I'll come knocking on your door.
I don't know anything about lacrosse, Scott, but, I'm a perfect guinea pig to read it. So teach me, teacher. Great to have you on, pal.
Thank you so much for having me.
You got it. Scott Price, SL Price. He is by SL Price out on Twitter, and you can go find his book anywhere books are sold, Playing Through the Whistle, Steel Football in an American Town. I called him because, he spent Super Bowl Sunday with Jon Gruden and wrote this unbelievable piece for it on the MMQB that you need to go read, and you can go to his Twitter as well. He's got, the Fells Point Diner on the front of his Twitter, so there's a little Baltimore going on there. This is a weird week. Anytime I talk to Dennis Kalatzis about going to Indianapolis, he gets a little wrung out about the Colts thing. I mean, I had the heebie-jeebies for, 29 years, whatever the hell it was. I denounced all the heebie-jeebies with the Colts. I will reshare that piece because I do every single year from Indianapolis. Luke and I will be in Indianapolis all week long chasing football players and future millionaires and busts and projects and rejects and Hall of Famers. There'll be a few out there somewhere amidst the madness. We'll be out in downtown Indianapolis all week long. All of our coverage brought to you by our friends at Friedmont Mortgage. Don't make a 30-year mistake by choosing the wrong lender. You need Friedmont's education online. Go to FriedmontMortgage.com. Also by our friends at King Discount Liquors, lottery, beer, booze, and the best prices in Baltimore. Get on over to Rosedale and give the King a ring. Also, the Buy a Toyota Audio Vault is there for you 24 hours a day for anything you miss. We're going to be Facebook Living, and we're going to be YouTubing and talking to all sorts of football people and athletes and coaches. And sometimes even Coach Harbaugh stops by Super Bowl week, or Indianapolis Combine week. Far cry from Super Bowl week. I want to point that out. There's a lot of energy, though, in Indianapolis. It'll be a fun week there as well. The Buy a Toyota Audio Vault for anything you miss. Morning newspaper ships directly to your email inbox each and every morning at 7 a.m. It's all brought to you by Planet Fitness at PlanetFitness.com. Still $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life, guaranteed there always. Last but never least, any breaking news, and we're not dealing Manny Machado. Not yet, anyway, but if Nestor Cortez makes the team, we're going to text that out twice to you. It's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. And Dennis Kalatzis is here on Thursday from 3 until 5, skipping the Combine until we move the Combine to Los Angeles. And I'm sure that's not far behind. They might move the Combine to London or Frankfurt before it's all over with. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 at WNST Towson, Baltimore. And we never stop talking Baltimore sports.